I'm Lauren Fordyce, the Urban IPM Educator with UC IPM. Thank you for joining us today. Today's talk is titled Flea Control and Diseases, Starting from Scratch. We are excited to have presenting today Laura Krueger. Laura is a self-proclaimed hardcore bug nerd who believes the West Coast is truly the pest coast. She is a board-certified entomologist, medical and veterinary specialty, employed by the Orange County Mosquito and Vector Control District. Laura began her career as an entomologist technical trainer with the Western Exterminator Company over 20 years ago and is licensed as a pest control advisor, qualified applicator, and vector control technician. She specializes in the control of mosquitoes, fleas, and rats. Laura received her Master's of Public Health from Yale University and a Biology of Science degree from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. We are grateful to have you joining us today to learn about fleas. I will stop sharing and you can begin.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to spend some time talking about fleas. Fleas obviously are a nuisance, and in general, majority of us don't like dealing with them. And specifically here in California, many of us live in areas where fleas can be active year-round. So my goal today is to be able to provide you with information about fleas and also what you can do to control fleas on your property and specifically on your pets. Okay, so we'll go ahead and restart and say we'll take a look at the front of the flea. And so in this picture, we have a zoomed in image of the flea. And what we can see here is that the face of the flea is covered in a lot of like sensory hairs and bristles. And these are what the flea uses in order to locate their hosts. And since the fleas do require blood meals in the adult life stage, they're always on, and if they come off of a host, they're always going to be able to find another host with using these sensory organs on their bodies. And as a reminder about fleas, for those of you who are interested in insects, fleas previously were in their own order of insects called Siphonaptera. And in 2020, a researcher did some research on the genetics of fleas and determined that fleas are actually parasitic scorpion flies. And that means that fleas are now nestled in a different order of insects. And so what's interesting about fleas is that they're so different than the majority of insects that it took researchers, over many years to determine where these insects originally came from. And there's links if you want more information about scorpion flies and fleas in the PowerPoint that will be available. And fleas are found worldwide. They're found on every continent, including Antarctica. And they're also found associated not just with mammals, but also with birds. And we're going to take a second here, and I'm going to show a section of a video from PBS's Deep Look on fleas, and hopefully everyone can hear this.
Sometimes, to get where you want in life, you need to go all out. Fleas need to get off the ground and onto someone they can exploit. That's bad news if you've got fur or feathers. There are more than 2,000 flea species, each partial to its own kind of creature. But the one you'll most likely cross paths with is the cat flea. Fleas are one of nature's greatest jumpers, taking a gigantic leap, almost too fast to comprehend. They're small and narrow, like a little sesame seed with legs. Their fly ancestors lost their wings millions of years ago to help them slip through fur with ease. Fleas are tough to get rid of. Stiff backwards-facing hairs catch on fur when you try to pick them out. Try to squish one? Nope. Their flexible bodies are armored with rugged plates called sclerites. Adult fleas only eat one thing: blood. This cat flea prefers cat blood, but in a pinch, it'll latch onto you too. They lay eggs that drop from the cat's body into its bedding. A few days later, they hatch, and worm-like larvae wiggle out. The hungry larvae scavenge for food. Their favorite meal comes from mom and dad: adult flea poop. That's just semi-digested blood.
Trigger warning. I forgot this one. Flea
Now, who
poop.
could turn that down? The larva curls up in a cocoon it makes from whatever dirt, sand, or other materials it finds nearby. A few days later, voila, all grown up. Now this hungry flea needs a warm body to call home. Its jump is super fast, 100 times faster than the blink of an eye. But it takes more than muscle to move that fast. The flea can compress itself like a spring, thanks to a rubbery protein called resilin in its legs and body. First, the flea pulls in its oversized rear legs and locks them in place. It squeezes and flattens its body, squishing the resilin and building up energy for the jump. Then, it releases the energy all at once. The flea tumbles through the air, legs extended. With a lot of effort and a little luck, it'll land on its target and the whole incredibly itchy cycle will begin again.
All right. So hopefully that gave some insight, and it's also a reminder that fleas, are like butterflies.
Hi, Deep
For
Deeps.
those of you who don't remember or aren't aware, that fleas have a complete life cycle. And so fleas hatch from eggs laid by the adult female fleas. They hatch into larvae. Those larvae then feed on adult flea feces and other pet dander in the nest area where the animals are at rest or at sleep. And then they pupate after anywhere from 5 to 35 days. And then in the pupa phase, they have an ability to go through the pupal phase quickly in 5 days or less, or if a host is not present, it can take over 150 days. And so this is one of the frustrating aspects of flea biology, which is that the flea pupa are surrounded by this pupal case that can be impenetrable to insecticides. And so that is the reason why oftentimes multiple applications of insecticides are required to end the flea population life cycle. And we're going to do a deep dive throughout the flea life cycle as we move through the presentation. And I'd just like to direct everyone to another resource that's available, which is a photographic key that you can use to tell what fleas you're dealing with. Now, obviously, for many people, fleas are just fleas. It doesn't matter what species they are, but there are many different species of fleas, and some of them are more impactful for flea-borne disease. And we do, here at the Orange County Mosquito and Vector Control District, we host these images of fleas on the website, and the key is available free to download and to review. Even though there are many fleas in California and in the United States, the Centers for Disease Control recognizes 3 fleas as being of primary public health importance. The first is the cat flea, second is a ground squirrel flea, and the third being the oriental rat flea. And these 3 fleas are responsible for the majority of flea-borne diseases in California and in the United States. But I would add that here we know, at least in Southern California, that there's a 4th flea, which is called the stick-tite flea, and that flea has also been linked to flea-borne typhus. So we know that fleas can cause human disease, and they can also cause problems for pets in terms of causing flea-associated allergies like flea allergy dermatitis, and then also potentially they can vector tapeworms to pets. So I put together this list of health issues for people and pets associated with fleas in the Western US. And the first would be allergies that can occur from flea bites. And I've also listed here something called tungiasis, which is a condition that's not found in the United States, but due to globalization, it's definitely possible that this particular flea could come to the US in the future. And for those of you doing any international travel, it could be something that you encounter. Fleas can also, as I mentioned, spread tapeworms to domestic cats and dogs and potentially to people. And then here in California specifically, fleas can be responsible for transmitting flea-borne typhus, plague, and cat scratch disease, which is associated with Bartonella henselae. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the public health importance of fleas. So flea-associated dermatitis, and this is obviously a picture of a dog, but the mechanism of flea-associated dermatitis is similar in people, and that is that fleas bite animals. They puncture the skin of the animal with their mouth parts. Both the male and the female flea feed on blood. And when they puncture into the skin of the animal, that flea saliva sets up an antigen antibody reaction, which can lead to inflammation. And the inflammation causes the itching, which causes the scratching, which can then cause additional issues with bacteria in the bite site. So in researching this presentation, I was interested to learn that up to 50% of domestic dogs can have flea-associated dermatitis, leading to large expenses in veterinary bills. And now I'm going to tell you the next slide has some disturbing images on it, and that is images of what's called the Chigo flea. This flea has not been detected in the United States yet, but it is a flea that uses the human as a host. And so in this example, adult fleas lay eggs into in a substrate, and such as sand normally. Those eggs hatch into larvae, and the larvae can burrow into people's feet. This is a picture of my cousin Kristen's toe. She's an aid worker in Africa, and she returned home to the United States, and there was a flea embedded in her toe. She did have to see the doctor to have the flea removed. So we do not expect this to occur in the United States, but it is possible. We also have the dog and cat tapeworm. Now, the tapeworm itself requires the adult flea, cat fleas in particular, in order to complete its life cycle. And so tapeworms can be a problem. They can, because of the fact that they can drain host nutrients in blood, and they can lead to other potential issues for animals. So how do we know what the tapeworms look like? Some of you, it's rare we see the large tapeworms occurring outside of animals' bodies. This is a tapeworm on the right, the cat and dog tapeworm. On the left is the end of the tapeworm itself has these sections called proglatids, which have eggs to start new worms in them. And so people sometimes report that these look like grains of rice. They can be around the anus of cats and dogs, and they can come out of the pets and then stick to surfaces in the home, like bed sheets if your pet sleeps with you, or on the living room couch, or potentially on the floor. So these are the, additionally, if anyone were to ingest an adult flea, and we don't anticipate that this would happen, but it could happen in large flea infestations. If you were to somehow actually eat a flea that's infected with the cat tapeworm, there is the possibility to transmit the tapeworm to people. And so it is estimated, and this seems like a higher number than I would have thought, that 1 in 1,000 pet owners may have had exposure to dog or cat tapeworms. So the way to prevent this acquiring a tapeworm is, of course, to keep the pets on topical or preventative flea treatments. Moving into some of the pathogens that fleas can carry, one is called flea-borne typhus. And flea-borne typhus is not to be confused with scrub typhus or epidemic typhus, known as trench fever. This is a different disease. It's mainly associated with fleas, cat fleas, rat fleas, and the murine typhus bacteria can be transmitted to people primarily through exposure to their pets. And the problem is with flea-borne typhus that it can make people very ill. It's here in Orange County. 85% of reported cases are hospitalized, and they're hospitalized due to ongoing symptoms like high fevers, shaking, chills, weakness, headaches, photophobia, or a desire to be out of the light. And about 50% of people, or slightly less than 50%, will develop a rash with this illness. And flea-borne typhus is important because these symptoms, it mimics other illnesses, and the longer it takes for flea-borne typhus to be diagnosed and treated with doxycycline as an antibiotic, the worse the outcomes can be for people. And as I mentioned, people acquire typhus, or they're exposed to the bacteria from the flea feces or from biting fleas. And 85% of people who acquire typhus have had exposure from fleas on their pet cats or dogs. Pet cats or dogs pick up fleas from wildlife who potentially have flea infestations like possums, feral cats, raccoons. And the fleas then leave the wildlife and they can jump onto people's pets. And so it is recommended to reduce exposure to flea-borne typhus is to keep your pets on flea control products year-round and remove any sort of animal food or attractive items to animals that may be on your property, and then also eliminate places that animals can hide, especially sealing up sub-area vents so that animals cannot nest under a house. The majority of flea-borne typhus cases can be related to animals nesting around the home. And then what happens is if animals, let's say they get hit by a car or they don't return to the nest site, fleas emerge, and then looking for another host, they can jump on people. It is also recommended that if you find a dead animal on your property, that you protect yourself when disposing of the animal. So pick up the animal using a shovel, place it in a plastic bag, and then dispose of it in the trash. For dead animals on city streets or public areas, you can contact your local animal cares for pickup or disposal. And so here's a video showing how the disease is transmitted, which is trigger warning here, which is fleas when they bite you, they also poop at the same time. We see this in a lot of blood feeding arthropods where they take a meal, they fill themselves up, and then here they are, they poop as they're feeding and they scratch off that dried up fecal material. And then that fecal material can be itched into the flea bite itself, or it can be inhaled or respired. So, if you're petting your animal and they have what's commonly called flea dirt on that, that flea dirt can contain the infectious bacteria, flea-borne typhus. In Orange County and in Southern California, flea-borne typhus cases were rare from 1930 up until about 2019. And what I mean by that is there were very few cases, less than 50 cases reported from Southern California. And then from 2006 until now, there have been over 300 cases of the illness reported from Orange County, and even more cases reported from Los Angeles County. The California Department of Public Health maintains an online portal where you can look to see how many cases of typhus are reported from your area. And what we see is that an increase of flea-borne typhus cases from 2015 till 2023. And in 2022, the highest number of typhus cases were reported in California, and that would be over 250 cases per year. Less cases occurred last year, and so far in 2024, there seem to be even fewer cases of typhus, but they are still present, and we expect more cases to occur during the summer months, the height of the flea activity. So in this picture, we can see the map of California, and you can see that almost 95% of flea-borne typhus cases occur in Los Angeles and Orange counties. But if you adopt pet cats and dogs from other areas in Northern California, you adopt pet cats and dogs from Southern California, there is definitely a risk of the flea-borne typhus pathogen. And unfortunately, typhus can be fatal. In 2022, which was the highest number of cases in Los Angeles County, we saw 3 deaths that occurred that were directly linked to flea-borne typhus. And so, unfortunately, typhus can be a fatal illness if people do not receive the correct medical attention. In 2022, the case fatality rate, meaning that it was 1% of cases who acquire typhus are likely to die. And so we're thankful that that number is as low as it is and that deaths are rare. But unfortunately, hospitalizations are very common, and the disease can lead to some complications. And so older people in particular, can take, 6 months to a year to recover from the illness. And so flea-borne typhus should be considered in patients who had a history of animal or flea exposure, and they've had a fever for greater than 3 days. And I'd like to, for those of you who are interested in the disease, a writer named Megan Daum, who lived in the Los Angeles area, she wrote a book called Unspeakable about some things that went on in her life, and she includes when she almost died of flea-borne typhus. She had a dog. She allowed the dog to sleep in the bed with her. She acquired typhus. It was misdiagnosed, and she published a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times that then went into the book Unspeakable regarding her experience with typhus and the frustration and how long it took her to receive the appropriate diagnosis and treatment. So why is flea-borne typhus increasing, and why are we seeing more of this disease in particular? Could it be due to rising temperatures, or could it be there's more fleas or more flea bacteria in the environment? Could it be related to the presence of feral cat colonies or the feeding of animals in colonies on city streets? Could it be that people are just having more exposure to animals that carry fleas, like possums? Or is it just that there's more people owning pets that have more fleas? We don't know all the answers to why flea-borne typhus is becoming more common in California, in Southern California in particular. We just know that it is occurring. And the final disease I just want to spend a few minutes talking about is a disease called cat scratch disease. And this is a bacterial illness caused by Bartonella henselae. And in this illness, this is mainly associated with cats, hence the name cat scratch disease, but it can the bacteria can also be found in cat fleas that can occur on other animals. And so how someone acquires this illness is from either a scratch from primarily a kitten, or potentially from flea bites. And it's a slow growing bacteria that causes a low-grade fever. It can cause enlarged or tender lymph nodes. It also causes a papular or pustule at the site of the scratch. And it can be treated with antibiotics if the person catches it and brings it forward to the doctor. And something that's interesting is many of us may recall the song Cat Scratch Fever by Ted Nugent. In that song in 1977, one of the lines is, "You know you got it when you're going insane." And it took until 2020 to be proven, but it has been shown through scientific studies that untreated infection with Bartonella henselae, cat scratch fever, is linked to psychiatric symptoms and mental illness. And it can also lead to endocarditis and damaged heart valves. So in the event that you've adopted a kitten or that you're scratched by a kitten or a cat and that you see a red infected pustule or swollen lymph nodes, it is advised to seek medical attention. Regarding plague, this is the final disease that we're going to discuss today, and that can be related to fleas. I do just want to say that in California, we have already had our first case of plague related to fleas and cats, and that occurred actually in December of 2023. And that was a person who had exposure to a cat that had plague, and then the person acquired plague from the cat or from potentially cat fleas. And so this is not that common. It does not occur that often. From 1970 to 2020 in California, there were only 45 cases of plague, but the case fatality rate is anywhere from 5 to 15% of people who get plague potentially could die. And so because of that, it's definitely an illness that we do not want to acquire from either our pets or from wildlife or from fleas. And the problem with plague is that it impacts a number of animals, and plague has been detected in a number of flea species, including pet cats. And so the association between plague and fleas are that fleas mainly found on ground squirrels, Norway rats, roof rats, house mice, or cats in some areas can be infected with the plague bacteria. And so that's yet another reason why we want to limit our exposure to fleas. And in general, the CDC does have some general recommendations for flea disease prevention, including, make sure you reduce rodent or animal habitat around your home and limit exposure to stray animals. You can wear flea repellent if you think you're going to be exposed to fleas in a situation. And then specifically keep your pets on flea control products year round. Bathe or brush your pet regularly to inspect for flea dirt or flea feces. We'll learn more about that in a minute. Limit time outside if you're being exposed to fleas, and then clean pet bedding frequently with soap and water. You don't want to, and then this is probably the most controversial CDC recommendation for those of us with pets is the CDC says, do not allow pets to sleep on your bed. So there is a direct linkage between adult fleas on pets, biting pets, and also biting people. And that link can be if they sleep in your bed with you. And then, of course, don't accidentally swallow a dead flea. So hopefully that none of us will have that occur. But there is a link with younger children, especially toddlers or crawling children exposed to dead fleas, potentially on a floor, and then picking them up and having exposure to them in that way. So as we saw in the video, and as I showed earlier, fleas are like butterflies. They have this complete life cycle. The other thing to remember about fleas is that when you're experiencing an infestation of adult fleas, this is this triangle represents a population of fleas, and you can see in a population of fleas, most of the population is in the egg life stage. Over 50% of the total population is eggs, 35% are larvae, 10% are pupa, and about 5% of the overall flea population is in the adult life stage. So what that means is that fleas are hard to control because we're being bitten by the adult life stage. But in reality, we need to focus our control on eggs, larvae, and the pupal stage in order to limit the adult stage. And flea eggs, they're hard to see. It's almost impossible to see them. The adult fleas can lay anywhere from 5 to 7 eggs a day and potentially up to 500 eggs in a flea's and in a female flea's life. And so what you see here is someone's finger with flea eggs on it. And the eggs themselves are not sticky. They're laid by adult fleas directly on the fur of the animal. And then the eggs fall off the animal and they go into the nest where they develop into larvae. And the flea larvae have 3 larval instars. And the development of the larvae is dependent on a few things. It's dependent on temperature. It's dependent on nutrients. And it's also dependent on how many other fleas are there. I think this is so interesting that groups of larvae develop more successfully than single fleas alone. And that could be because fleas require feces of the adult flea to feed on in their larval stage. And so this is, people sometimes say, well, I only saw one flea. There's always more fleas. If you're seeing one flea, be assured that there's likely more fleas in the environment or more eggs, larvae, and pupae in the environment. And for the larvae, it's important to note that they require a fairly high humidity environment to develop in, and the humidity has to be above 33%. Otherwise, the flea larvae will not be able to shed their skins and develop into a pupa. And unfortunately, another frustrating part of their biology is that the larvae will burrow. Think of carpeting here. They'll burrow into carpet to restrict their exposure to sunlight and to prevent their bodies from desiccating. So all of these things make flea larvae actually very difficult to control, especially inside of homes. So here's a couple images of the flea larvae themselves. And then at the top, you can see what flea dirt looks like, or flea feces. Because as those larvae are feeding on adult flea feces, they themselves are also pooping in the environment and leaving behind this flea dirt. Okay. We're going to go ahead and skip through some of these videos. They'll play in the background. I'm going to skip it. But animals can have a huge number of fleas. Sorry, I didn't realize we were going to get the sad music associated with those animals. But even if you have many animals in your home, you need to treat all of the animals for the fleas. What we're seeing here is how fleas, they fill themselves up and they then can turn it into these pre-pupal stages. So this is when the larvae are full with nutrition and they are now ready to pupate. And so when they pupate, what's also interesting is about half of the fleas will make themselves a cocoon, which will be made out of dirt or debris in the environment. And that's what we're seeing on the right here, which is that sand or other dirt and debris has been used to form cocoons for the fleas. And then after making these cocoons, the larvae will molt into a white sort of flea-like pupa. So this is what we're seeing here. On the left, you can see this is a naked flea pupa. They're initially white for the first few days as they're developing, and then they'll turn into this darker brown color. And then that means they're almost through with their pupation. We do know that there are some optimal temperatures for flea development. Ideally, the flea larvae would prefer relative humidity greater than 70% and temperatures between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. But if they have high heat conditions, that is negative for the fleas, and so they cannot survive high heat or cold temperatures. And so it's really these protected microhabitats in our home, like carpet or the edge of carpet, or cracks and crevices in sofas, that are preferred for flea development. And we know that the days that are needed for flea development, this is an example of the pupal stage, but it decreases with increasing temperature. So flea pupa at warmer temperatures like 80 degrees, they can develop in less than 10 days. And at colder temperatures around 60 degrees, it can take them at 30 to 40 days to pupate and then emerge as the adult flea. And the adult fleas, they emerge from the pupal case in response to a trigger, which could be vibration, or it could be heat, or even CO2. So in this photo, we're looking at pest control workers' pants, which are covered with adult fleas. And so situations like this can arise if an animal like a dog had fleas on a property, the people move, those eggs continue to develop to larvae, the larvae develop to pupa, and then there's no animals on the property, the fleas will stay in the pupal case and wait until a vibration, heat, or CO2, or someone walks by, in which case you can see a large emergence of fleas. The adult fleas themselves, both the males and females, they blood feed. They put their proboscis directly into capillaries whenever possible. They can increase their body weight by over 15 times when they take that blood meal. And they can weigh, 140 times more than they did following the blood meal. And then after taking that blood meal, they need to spend some time to digest the blood and develop into the eggs. Most of the time, the adult fleas need to live directly on the host. So they're spending their whole life on, once they emerge from the pupa, on the cat or the dog. But they can live off of the host as well. They can live about anywhere from 11 to ish days off of the host, and they can survive as an adult flea on a host with regular blood supply for over 60 days. So they live about 2 months on the host. We know that peak flea season is now in California. It's from May until November. In Southern California, peak flea season occurs year round. And if you are located at higher elevations or placed with a cold frost, that will limit larval development, and it will make it unfavorable for the larvae to develop from November to April, but it doesn't completely stop their development. Small populations of these adult fleas, they can be found on hosts all year long, including hosts that spend their entire lives in winter living outside. So it is sort of a mystery how in cold climates fleas continue to persist from year to year, but we do know that they can survive directly on the hosts themselves in the fur. Urban wildlife has a large number of fleas. So possums, that is have the largest number of fleas in the urban environment. Coyotes have a large number of fleas, both types of squirrels, ground squirrels and tree squirrels. And then raccoons, skunks, especially skunks because they burrow in the ground, and by burrowing in the ground, that creates an environment with higher humidity for the larvae to complete their development. Just a little bit about flea index. We know that on average, a possum has anywhere from 70 to 100 fleas on it, and that would be a small possum or a large possum. And the most fleas we've ever removed from a possum is 1,166. And so based on models we conducted, we know that a possum that has over 1,000 fleas on it could be dropping up to 18,000 flea eggs into the environment every day. So if you're seeing possums, skunks, feral cats on your property, walking on the fence of your property, then what's happening is those animals are dropping off flea eggs onto your property. And if their conditions are right, they can develop into adult fleas. So as I mentioned, possums have the most fleas, followed by skunks, squirrels, Norway rats, and also feral cats. Some of the uncommon flea hosts, but it can happen, is birds. And so we do know that birds can be hosts for fleas, and that the fleas on birds can be associated with the nest area in particular. And this is a picture of aerial crews from San Mateo Mosquito and Vector Control District, removing a bird's nest that had contributed hundreds of fleas into the environment. And so because of these diseases associated with fleas, it is important to reduce the risk of flea disease. And the way to do that is by controlling the fleas. And so I'll spend just the last few minutes talking about flea control. We do know that flea control can be expensive. I looked online and saw that the national average for paying for a flea control service is going to be anywhere from $75 to $400. So anything you can do to prevent fleas on your property or control the infestation yourself is going to probably end up saving you some money. And so for the remainder of the slides, I'm going to use a resource document that's going to be provided from Mississippi State University, which talks about how fleas occur primarily in 3 places: on the pet, in the house, and in the yard. And that's why a flea control program needs to have all these following components. You need to inspect your pet for fleas. You need to apply flea control to the pet year round, and then frequent vacuuming of carpeted or living areas to remove dead fleas and also to remove developing fleas, and then regular washing of the pet's bedding. There's lots of YouTube videos about how can you wash your pet's bedding, which can be informative. And then, of course, if fleas are present, it's likely that you'll need to apply a pesticide to the environment and also to the pet to control the adult flea population quickly. So you can inspect for the flea dirt by using a flea comb. I think this picture is kind of funny because this guy, he's got on glasses and a respirator or a respiratory protection. Most of the time that is not needed when you're flea combing your pet. You can just go ahead and take the comb, look for the presence of the flea dirt. If the dirt is present, you probably have a flea infestation. And you can then treat your pet through some of these options, which are a topical on fur application, a systemic application, meaning administering a pill to your pet cat or dog. And then the less efficacious option is considered to be the flea collar. So whenever possible, when you're making an application to your pet, you're going to want to use a topical on fur, on skin application, or a systemic flea control product like a pill. And the FDA does provide us some warnings regarding buying pet products online. So this is from fda.gov. There's information about some products that have been linked to some issues with some certain breeds of animals, and then also some problems with buying or purchasing pet medication online. So you can also, if you experience any adverse reactions with your pets, you can then also report those adverse reactions on the FDA webpage. But one important part of flea control is this vacuuming. And vacuuming causes the vibration, it stimulates flea pupa to emerge, and it's been shown that vacuuming alone can remove up to 80% of fleas and larvae from a home. So it must always take place when you're dealing with a flea infestation. And it's also a reminder to move furniture to vacuum underneath. The larvae can crawl a significant distance, many feet away from the nest site to develop. Also, frequent washing, once every week is what CDC recommends to launder, wash, or dry or sun dry the pet bedding. And then if you have found that the bedding of the pets has flea dirt on it, then it's also recommended, if your pet sleeps on your bed, to then launder your human bedding as well. So once again, CDC does not recommend sleeping with your pet in the bed. In general, when you're making a flea control treatment around your own home, unless the pesticide has specific recommendations, it is not required for you to wear gloves, a respirator, or eye protection. But if you are a professional pest management person, it is recommended that if you're doing jobs for hire for flea control, that you wear a N100 or P100 respirator if trapping live animals, removing dead animals, or crawling in sub areas or attics. And then a few other additional considerations for indoor or outdoor fleas, which is the formulation of pesticide that you're going to use, meaning should it be a dust, should it be a premixed residual liquid, or should it be a granule? And also the type of active ingredients used. It's to select a product that has an insect growth regulator and also has residual activity. And then most flea treatment guides will tell you that 2 or 3 applications at least of pesticides, at least 7 to 10 days apart, is required in order to get a flea infestation under control. So unfortunately, a single spray or a single treatment of your pet is unlikely to control the flea infestation. It needs to be treating the pet, vacuuming, or treating the environment as well, and that will lead to the quickest reduction in the flea population. When you spray indoors, do not use the ready-to-use aerosol foggers. Those are not considered effective. It is better to use a liquid pesticide or an aerosol pesticide that is directed into cracks and crevice, furniture, carpet areas, and pet bedding. And then to repeat that treatment 2 to 3 times, or 1 week apart, or according to the pesticide label. And residual pesticides are pesticides that persist in the environment. Research by Mississippi State University has showed that liquid pesticide applications are the most efficacious applications for the both indoors and outdoors, and not to use granular type applications of pesticides for the outdoor environment. In the document you can be provided, there's 2 tables which list pesticides which can be used to control fleas indoors and outdoors, and it also contains a table to talk about the types of pesticide formulations available for use on pets. It is recommended that whatever pesticide you select to use, that it contains an insect growth regulator. An insect growth regulator is a pesticide that limits flea development, and it can have a long residual. And so it's something to consider when purchasing pesticides. Liquid sprays perform better than granular sprays in outdoor environments. And on inspecting in your own property, it may be necessary to make a flea treatment into an animal burrow or nest. If that is necessary, it is recommended to use a dust. The presence of feral cats or feral cat feeding around your home or yard is could be a regular source of reintroductions of fleas to your properties. And we do see, unfortunately, a large number of flea infestations persisting in public spaces such as schools where well-intentioned people may be feeding cats. Another issue that may occur, and this can be a bummer, I call this one fleas in trees. This is when animals that nest in trees, like possums, they can have a flea infestation. So in this case, fleas could drop from the tree itself onto your residential property. And that's also another problem for treating or controlling fleas in trees, is that you actually oftentimes have to remove the nest site, and it's often hard to spray pesticides like above your head. So fleas in trees may require assistance from a professional pest manager. And then in terms of monitoring flea infestations, the best thing to do is monitor for your own pets, of course, looking for flea dirt. But if you are at a work site, you can place out sticky traps, which just traps kind of randomly traps fleas, but they can be effective to determine if there are fleas present. And then there is something called the white sock method, which is where you can walk around on your property with like a white socks on or using a white towel and see if any fleas emerge and jump onto the socks or the towel, indicating there's still a problem in the outdoor environment. As of 2017, which is the last time research was conducted, there was no known insecticide resistance to fleas, meaning that the product failures, if you're noticing the flea medication isn't working correctly on your pet, it may be due to the type or the way that the product is being applied. So at this time, there is nothing that has been noted to indicate that there is widespread resistance of fleas to insecticides. So hopefully I've been able to provide you some general information about fleas and flea disease. And at this time, I'm able to take questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for that great presentation.